Sometimes life is too hard to be alone, and sometimes life is too good to be alone. Aristotle said that to live alone, you had to be an animal or a god. Nietzsche completed this idea, saying that you have to be a bit of both at the same time. In addition, studies have shown that being alone for a long time and constantly can be as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. This was published in a study in 2010. To avoid the problems of loneliness, it's important to try to connect more with other people. But we also need to learn to be okay when we're alone, because not everyone who is alone feels sad or lonely. I bet many of you watching now feel that way, even more so with the constant use of social media, looking for a way to feel less lonely. A philosopher called Henry David Thoreau spent a lot of time alone in nature, near a lake. He wrote in his book Walden Pond that he never felt lonely during this period and even said, "I have never found a friend as good as solitude." Solitude can help personal growth, give freedom, improve our mental health, and make us stronger. Nietzsche also explained the difference between being alone and feeling lonely. He said that loneliness is one thing, and being alone is quite another. Another philosopher, Philip Koch, explained that solitude is a time when we are away from other people, not just physically, but also in our thoughts, feelings, and actions. Many important people in history have used solitude to grow and do incredible things. For example, Jesus spent 40 days and nights in the desert, and this helped him achieve great spiritual conquests. Buddha and Moses also found important ideas in solitude that guided their lives. Philosophers such as Marcus Aurelius, Nietzsche, Emerson, and Thoreau used solitude as a way of thinking better and understanding the world without the influence of other people. Nietzsche, for example, said that when he was in the midst of many people, he began to think and act like the people around him, but felt that he was losing his essence, as if they were stealing his soul. That's why he sought moments alone, like in the desert, to become himself again. These moments alone, without stimuli from other people, can also be what enlightens us in terms of ideas. In fact, this is how Isaac Newton discovered gravity, which revolutionized modern physics. Another example is Richard Byrd, an explorer who spent an entire winter alone in Antarctica, facing bitter cold, long nights, and complete solitude for 6 months. Despite being a very difficult experience, he found it transformative. In the book he wrote about this experience, called Alone, he said that, in solitude, he began to understand things better and organize his thoughts. He said, "Many things that were confused in my mind started to become clear. Why do some people like being alone, while others feel sad or uncomfortable? Often, those who don't like solitude don't understand how good it can be or don't know how to enjoy it. One of the good things about being alone is the chance to discover who you really are and try to be that person for real." The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer said, "A person can only be himself when he is alone. If they don't like being alone, they don't like freedom either, because it's when we're alone that we're really free." According to him, being with other people always brings us some limitations, since we have to make sacrifices to get along with them. As Robert Greene says, when we are with other people, we wear a social mask to interact in the world. In his book Essays and Aphorisms, Schopenhauer explains that in order to understand the freedom that solitude gives us, we need to think about the demands that arise when we live with other people. Friends, family, and even partners are important for life, but they also bring responsibilities. We need to listen, help, and often accompany their emotions. If someone is happy, it can cheer us up, but if they are sad or angry, it can bring us down too. As the philosopher Ronald David Lang observed, "If they're not happy, I can't be happy either. If I try to make them happy, that's not fun, that's hard work." Even strangers can influence our mood and the way we feel. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre used an interesting example to explain this. Imagine you're alone in a park, enjoying the sunshine, listening to the birds and admiring the trees. It seems that everything is there, just for you. But suddenly, someone sits down on a nearby bench. That changes everything. Now you know you're being watched, and you start to feel a little different, perhaps more shy or self-conscious. That moment shatters the peace you were feeling. William James also talked about something similar. He said that if you're walking alone and see someone else approaching, you can feel less at ease. That person's presence makes you feel less free, as if you now have to worry about what the other person is thinking. Sartre explained this with the famous phrase, "Hell is other people." He meant that when we are with other people, we start to see ourselves the way we think they see us. This can make us feel as if we are just an object in their eyes and not ourselves. If you feel lonely, It's because you haven't made friends with yourself. When we're alone, there are no limitations, because solitude gives us a freedom that we don't have when we're with other people. At that moment, we can enjoy our surroundings without worrying about being watched. We are free to do whatever we want, at whatever time we want, and to think or feel whatever we want, without fear of what others might think or expect of us. At first, this freedom may seem strange because no one is controlling or limiting us. The English philosopher William Hazlitt liked to walk alone for long distances, just to enjoy what he called the freedom of solitude. He said that when he walked alone, he felt completely free to think, feel, and act the way he wanted without having to please anyone. "I like to do things my way, and that's only possible when I'm alone," he said. Another philosopher, Philip Koch, agreed, quoting Thoreau, "I walk with a freedom that is strange in nature." This is because in solitude we are free from social rules and expectations. We can do anything, even something unexpected like shouting or dancing. This freedom leaves us free to explore our thoughts and feelings, allowing our spirit to wander and discover new paths. It also helps us to get to know ourselves better, because being alone gives us the chance to dive into our thoughts, desires, and emotions without filters or judgments. When we are alone, we can connect with parts of who we are that we usually hide behind the masks we wear in society. In solitude, there's no need to keep those masks on, because there's no one around to judge. That's when we can listen to our own inner voice and feel free to be who we really are. The funny thing is, the famous phrase that has spread across social media when you see someone eating alone in a restaurant, for example. The phrase is freedom or loneliness. The funny thing is that judging loneliness by time alone, the phrase should be freedom or freedom. After going through a difficult period of isolation, writer May Sarton spent some time completely alone. In her book, Diary of a Loneliness, she wrote, "Now I'm beginning to feel that I'm returning to a deeper self, a self that has been too busy and too bruised to function for long." May Sarton shows how solitude can help us rediscover important parts of ourselves. The American philosopher Thomas Merton also talks about this in his book, The Silent Life. He said, "Not everyone needs to live like a hermit, but everyone needs a little silence and solitude in life. This is important in order to hear the inner voice, which shows who a person really is. When this voice is not heard, life becomes sad and tiring. If a person never has time to be alone and at peace with themselves, they end up losing themselves and stop really living." But it's important to remember that when we're alone, we don't always hear good things inside us. Sometimes this silence reminds us of difficult times in the past. It can also bring up feelings that we try to avoid, such as fears, sadness, and worries. When we're busy with everyday things, we can forget about them for a while, but in solitude, these thoughts come to the surface. We become more aware of our anger, jealousy, and hurt. But the good thing about being alone is that these feelings can be felt safely because there's no one around for us to take it out on in a wrong or unfair way. Even though these internal conflicts are painful, they are also an opportunity to confront what is hurting us. If we can stop, be quiet, and let these feelings invade us, we can understand them better. In this way, it's possible to solve these problems and even alleviate suffering that we've been carrying around for a long time. The writer Albert Camus said, "When one learns to be alone with one's suffering and resists the urge to run away, then there is not much more to learn." This shows the power of solitude to heal. A Japanese doctor called Shoma Morita created a form of therapy inspired by Zen Buddhism. He believed that instead of using medication or other therapies, it was important to give the patient time to be alone, without distractions, to face what was bothering them. A specialist called Ilsevate explains how this worked. When the patient arrived at the hospital, they were given a week of total rest. During this time, they couldn't talk to anyone, read, write, smoke, use the telephone, listen to the radio, or watch TV. He was alone with his illness until he accepted it completely. This approach showed how solitude could be used to help people heal from the inside out. In the past, many cultures understood how important solitude could be, and in some of them, being alone was even more valued than being in a group. For example, among the Tarahumara Indians, who live in the Sierra Madre in Mexico, Professor Joe Braufel noticed that they had a kind of cult of solitude. He explained, a 6-year-old boy can take some piñol, a powder made from corn, and go out with the sheep, being alone for a week or two. He doesn't see anyone during that time, and only comes back afterwards. These Indians are so used to living alone that they feel uncomfortable and even lost when they have to talk to other people. Even in cultures where people lived more in groups, There were times when they were alone, especially at important stages of life. For example, when a teenager was becoming an adult, he would go on a solitary journey as part of a ritual called a rite of passage. In this ritual, the boy was taken to a remote place in the middle of the desert, where he was left alone for a long time, sometimes even months. He had to do everything to survive: hunt, search for food, protect himself from dangerous animals, and face his own fears, such as the fear of the dark and the unknown. During this experience, he learned to deal with loneliness, fears, and the things he depended on. Little by little, he transformed his mind, which had previously seemed like an enemy, into an ally. Only the boys who made it through this journey were recognized as men by the community. As James Hallis wrote, "This isolation teaches an important truth. No matter how much we live in a group, our journey is lonely, and we must learn to find strength and comfort within ourselves." The boy had to rely on his wits, courage, and skills to survive. If he didn't, he might even die. These solitary journeys have been part of the culture of various peoples throughout history, but in our society today, this is very rare. This shows how people today are afraid of solitude. Instead of seeing loneliness as something valuable, most see it as something bad that just needs to be endured until we can be with other people again. Worse still, many run away from loneliness as if it were a problem, using cell phones, computers, and other devices to avoid silence. Perhaps our constant avoidance of solitude is the reason why problems such as anxiety and other mental illnesses have become so common. The philosopher Blaise Pascal, who lived in the 17th century, said, "All of humanity's problems come from the fact that people cannot be quiet, alone, in a room." When we avoid solitude, we also avoid the chance to learn more about ourselves and find strength within ourselves. Solitude is a luxury.